right. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining for this session with the VIN Foundation and ACVIM, focusing on our large animal internal medicine diplomats. My name is Dr. Rebecca Mears. I'm one of the members of the VIN Foundation student debt education team that'll be helping out kind of behind the scenes and everything with our webinar today. I've got just a couple of housekeeping things before I kick it over to Dr. Tony Bartels for the presentation and answering what I'm sure probably many questions about student loan repayment right now. So we have the chat open for you. I'm sure Tony might have some questions throughout. Feel free to use the chat for answering those questions or any technical issues throughout. We also have the Q&A, which you can find down at the bottom of your screen. That Q&A, you can ask questions anonymously there, and you can also upvote those questions. So that way, if you see a question that you also have, it just kind of lets us know those are the sort of the most pressing questions to work through. We'll be sending out a follow-up email in the next couple of days with the recording of the webinar, Tony's presentation with all the links and some additional information, as well as for those joining us live, that will also have the link to complete a survey for your CE information. And that will be coming from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. So just keep an eye out for that in the next couple of days. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Tony.
Great. Thank you, Becca. Welcome, everyone. I see some familiar names in there in terms of communications we've had. And hopefully I'm going to address some of the questions that you submitted during the registration. But please feel free to ask questions along the way too. As Becca stated, you can either use that chat or the Q&A function. I think the Q&A function allows you to do it anonymously if you'd prefer to do that. So like, don't feel like you have to wait until the end. If something comes up and there's something that you really want to make sure that I cover, then ask it in there. And I've got a second screen over here that I can monitor while I'm going through. So clearly we've got some things to talk about. I mean, we had some things to talk about before the results of the US election. So now we've got more to talk about, but also more questions than answers maybe in the short term here. So let's dive in. We'll kind of work through what we can. And then, you know, I do like when we have a smaller group session because it does make it more, you know, available for you to get answers to your own questions for your own circumstances, right? So feel free to throw those out there to the extent that you're comfortable. But here are some of the registration questions that came in for today's webinar, right? And this one actually cuts across a lot of different aspects. So we definitely have a lot to cover. In the previous one we did for ACVIM, it was mostly academicians where we focused a lot on public service loan forgiveness. We'll do that as well this afternoon. But there was also some interesting comments that came in about employers paying towards student debt, how to pay taxes on the amount that's forgiven, right? We need to talk about that as well. And then ultimately, you know, the save changes that have kind of been you know, interrupted by the courts recently and are likely to you know, again, we can only presume at this point, but you know, just based on the election results, SAVE is likely not to survive. So we're going to have to think about what's next, and you know, that's where our student loan physical exam is going to come in, right? We have to start looking at which income-driven options we have remaining to us, and then we're going to have to look for changes or future changes that might come with the change in administration as well. So we have some idea of what they propose to do, you know, whether or not they'll actually enact any of that or, you know, change any laws or anything. It remains to be seen, right? So we can only kind of go through what we know now, what they've proposed, and then things that we can look out for to get ready for those sorts of things. So that's where that physical exam is going to come into play. We've got some new diagnostics that we can do in terms of the forgiveness count adjustment. I did see somebody ask about that, right? So the IDR payment count updates. So we do have an update on that. And then from what we find there, we can talk about treatment plans, or at least some tentative ones based on you know, what we're able to do with the information that we currently have available. And then, I mean, the side effects are just piling up, right? So it's kind of difficult to know, and this is really the crux of what's, you know, uncertainty is not your friend in finance, right? You know, the markets hate it. You know, this is a perfect example of why uncertainty in something like the student loan repayment system drives everybody crazy, because it's very difficult to plan or to know what to do next. And we're kind of experiencing that firsthand. And then the prognosis we can talk about based on what we've seen over the years, and make some guesses as what's likely to happen next. So why do I do this? I'm a veterinarian. I'm married to a ACVIM diplomat, and we both have a boatload of student debt, right? So, and we've been paying on these student loans long enough now where we've experienced a lot of ups and downs and changes through the years in terms of all of the different things that have happened to the student loan repayment system just since we started repayment, which was a little more than 10 years ago. So, just a quick recap. I mean, we've got $400,000 of student debt, and if we want to eliminate that under a more traditional repayment structure, like a standard 10-year plan, which is available in the federal student loan repayment system, we would have to pay more than $4,500 a month towards our student loans. That's a pretty big number, right? Rather not do that if you don't have to. The income-driven repayment options offer you an option to make payments based on your income, but they've changed over the years, right? So we started out in one of the earlier versions called IBR. Then we had some new ones added along the way: pay as you earn, revised pay as you earn. Revised pay as you earn got converted to save, and over the during the course of that repayment, we also had the pandemic forbearance benefits where we turned off interest, turned off payments, still awarded forgiveness credit for those federal student loans, right? So that kind of highlighted some of the benefits, as well as watching some of these plans get instituted, additional unexpected benefits applied, and then seeing even more plans changed, created that were more beneficial to the borrower, right? But maybe we went a little bit too far here in some of these recent iterations. That's kind of what happened in the court cases here. So some states got together and said, hey, this is too much. We're losing too much money on collecting these loans. They found some judges in the federal court system that said, yeah, this is probably a little bit too far. So we're waiting to hear now what is next, right? So what does that mean? Are we going to lose just save? Are we going to lose any or all of the plans that were created in a similar manner as save was created? And what does that mean for forgiveness, income-driven repayment plan forgiveness, or even public service loan forgiveness, which is also wrapped up in all of this, since they're all kind of tied together. So the way the income-driven plans are generally supposed to work is that you make payments based on your income for a certain period of time. And different plans have different maximum repayment timeframes. So the original version of IBR was 25 years for folks with graduate school loans. Veterinary school is graduate school, so anybody with veterinary school loans is automatically in that 25-year IBR range. Same with revised pay as you earn, save as well. The newer version of IBR, if you are a more recent graduate, has a 20-year time frame, right? So these plans are set up so you're not in repayment forever. You hit that 25-year or 20-year maximum repayment time frame, and if you still have a balance that's remaining, that balance would get forgiven. And depending on what the rules are in place in terms of how the IRS treats forgiven debt, you may or may not have to pay a tax on that forgiven balance. There's currently a tax exemption on any student loan forgiveness, but that is set to expire in 2025. We'll have to see what Congress decides to do with that. I suspect it'll probably go away, but we'll have to wait and see. But anybody that can get forgiveness, it's kind of difficult right now, between now and the end of 2025 would not have to pay any federal income tax on the balance that's forgiven. So if you do use an income-driven plan and you're not otherwise working towards public service loan forgiveness, which is a tax-free version of forgiveness, then I would encourage you to also plan and save as if you have to pay that tax. And that's what my wife and I do. So we make our monthly student loan payment when it's due. We haven't had to make a student loan payment in quite some time. We're still planning for a potential tax down the road. So we're about 90% towards our estimated forgiveness tax target, with about 13 years to go. And I know there was a couple of people in the registration questions asked specifically about how do you plan? How do you save for that particular tax? This is what our student loan forgiveness tax fund, if you will, looks like, right? So the dotted line represents how much we've contributed. The solid line represents the value of that particular investment. The difference between what we contributed and what the value is essentially the capital gains on that, the amount above and beyond what we've contributed. So the bigger we can get this gap, right, from the amount that we contributed to the value of the fund, by the time we would need that to pay the tax, the less is actually coming out of our own pocket, right? So we're actually reducing the amount that we pay towards our student loans in total by planning for that tax long term, almost like we would plan for retirement, right? So you set aside a little bit of money and then you watch that money grow in the background, and eventually when you reach a retirement age, you can start to use those funds for your retirement. So oftentimes people, and I see it too in some of the student aid files that you upload into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool, people making payments that are above what they need to. And a lot of times they say they do that because they want to reduce the amount they have to pay in taxes. And I get that taxes are scary and nobody wants to pay more in taxes than they have to. But when it comes to student loan forgiveness, if you're projected to hit forgiveness, right? Your income is such that if you apply those payments towards those loans for that specified period of time, and it looks likely that you have a balance remaining at that 20 or 25-year time frame, it doesn't make sense for you to pay any more than your income requires. In fact, you want to push as much of your student loan balance into that forgiveness event and pay tax on what's left, because the tax is going to be a significant discount on what's remaining, right? So tax rates in this country, the maximum federal income tax rate is currently 37%, right? So worst case scenario on your federal student loans from a forgiveness standpoint and a federal tax standpoint is you're paying 37 cents on the dollar of everything that's forgiven, right? And that's why we don't try to accelerate our student loan payoff if it's likely that we're going to hit forgiveness. Now, if you're earning enough income where your payments are high enough on your student loans where you're going to pay the balance to zero before you hit forgiveness, then it can make sense for you to accelerate, financial sense to accelerate your student loan payoff, right? But if your projections consistently show that you're going to hit forgiveness, then it doesn't make sense for you to pay any more than your income requires, and to find the most beneficial repayment option, forgiveness repayment option, that allows your payment to be the lowest possible. And that's particularly true with public service loan forgiveness, right? So public service loan forgiveness has that tax-free forgiveness. So anything that you can push into that forgiveness bucket, you don't pay any tax on. So that's the most beneficial way of eliminating your student loans, if forgiveness makes sense for you. If you do have questions about this, we've over the years, we've amassed quite a database of cases, if you will, all veterinary students who are asking questions about their student loans and repayment options. You can post and receive a personalized consultation. You get the answers that you need. The rest of the community gets to learn from that as well. You do have the option of posting anonymously in there. I'll show you what that looks like, as a few of you had asked about getting personalized assistance, and I'll show you how we do that over on VIN in the student debt message board area. All right, so the student loan physical exam really never been more important, right? Especially with all of the changes. This is kind of one of those antidotes to uncertainty, is to really understand your student loans and the options that come with them, right? So if something does get eliminated, you're able to see what is next for me. Or when something new gets created, you can compare that newer option against your currently available options and see if it makes sense for you to take advantage of a newer option compared to your existing option. So there's a whole bunch of different things that we may find in our federal student loan borrowing history, right? So direct unsubsidized loans, grad plus loans, subsidized loans, particularly for undergraduate degrees. if you were in higher education at any point in time before July of 2010, you might still have these older school federal family education loans. This was kind of the precursor to the direct loan program, but they did discontinue that in 2010. Perkins loans also were available, but no longer since 2018. I do see them pop up for, folks that attended school before that time frame. Health profession student loans are another type of student loan that many veterinarians have, particularly if you went to a state veterinary school. Those are mostly available at those state veterinary schools. And then loans for disadvantaged students are also, I see them less frequently, but they're also similar to those health profession student loans. Those are all federal student loan types, which means they have the option or be eligible for the federal student loan repayment benefits, like income-driven repayment, like public service loan forgiveness, and also have some of those special discharge, deferment, and forbearance provisions that we don't often see with private loans. And some people have a mixture of both, right? So you might have federal student loans and private loans. Private loans, I usually see more from folks who attended an undergraduate institution where the cost exceeded what they could take in federal student loans, right? So we see a little mixture of federal student loans and then private student loans that cover that difference. But private student loans, I don't see them too often for veterinary school because you're able to borrow up to the cost of attendance in federal student loans once you get to something like veterinary school, right? So veterinary school, I mean, there's really no limit on the amount that you can borrow because it falls under the health profession where they're not subject to the same loan limit that other degree types are. So, whatever the school says the cost to attend plus some calculated living expenses is what you're able to borrow. So I don't see private loans too often for veterinarians. If you lost track of anything, check your credit report. Annualcreditreport.com allows you to do it at least once a year for free, if not more frequently, right? So this is a great habit to get into. Usually when I file my taxes, I check my credit report just to make sure there's not anything on there that I'm missing or I don't recognize, right? So if you go to make a major purchase, a home, a car, rent an apartment, start a business, anything where you're going to take out some loans or somebody wants to do a credit check on you, they're going to do this too, right? So you generally want to be familiar with what's on that credit report before somebody else calls it to your attention. So we can check which loan types we have by obtaining our federal student aid data file. So I'm going to take you over there, show you what that looks like. So this is the studentaid.gov website. It has a way for you to log in. This is also where, you would go to apply for FAFSA if you needed financial aid, right? So I'm going to log in quickly here. Does do this secondary security, but it's super fast, which is nice for demos. A lot of scary language. And the reason we go here instead of your loan servicer portal, which is fine. I mean, you can also check your student loan balance in your loan servicer portal. But when we do our physical exam of our student loans, we need to go here because all of the loan servicers, not only do the loan servicers change from time to time, their systems change, the way they present information changes. The information in the studentaid.gov portal is consistent for everyone. So federal loan servicers are contracted companies that are paid by the Department of Education to take payments on the Department of Education's behalf, and they're also your point of contact if you have questions about your student loan, right? But the way that they present that information to you can vary from loan servicer to loan servicer, even though all of the terms and conditions behind all of these federal student loans are the same. That the way they present that information can be a little bit different. So I like to go here because it's all consistent, right? And we're looking for your federal student aid data file, which is essentially the same for everyone, right? And it contains all of the borrowing history that you have with the Department of Education. So any student loans that you took along your pathway to and through veterinary school and even beyond will be in here, right? And all of those details will matter when it comes to analyzing which repayment options do I have available to me. How am I doing on my public service loan forgiveness progress? What plan should I maybe switch to if I need to? All of that can be determined from the data that's in here. So I'm looking for this download my aid data button. I click that. It's going to save this ugly text file, txt. Keep it on your computing device somewhere, and then I'll show you where you can put that text file, right? So we have a tool that's freely available on the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center that will help to pick through all of that data that's in that text file and show you which repayment options you're available to use, as well as a summary of all of the remaining balance information that's in there too. So these are there's a lot of information in there. I'll show you what it looks like in just a second with an example. But right now, we are really focused on which repayment plan am I in, which repayment options do I have available to me, and then layering that on the recent changes, and then maybe what's likely to come down the path here with the change in administration. Right, so I'm going to head over to the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. And this is a publicly available resource. Anybody can use it and everybody does use it. It's designed specifically for veterinary students and veterinarians, right? So anybody with graduate school loans, it will work for. So I see a lot of student aid files in here for dentists and lawyers and physicians. But again, it's designed specifically for veterinarians. So I've got a couple examples that I'll use. There's 3 options here. This is mostly for pre-vets. This is for veterinary students, for people who are still borrowing. And this is for folks that are done borrowing and in the repayment phase of student loans. So this is one of the cases that we'll work through this evening. This is a 2016 DVM who is currently doing a PhD and wants to know if they should be making payments. Now, this is an older file for them, right? So this file date is about a year old, right? So the data in here changes about monthly, maybe more frequently if you have done something like switch repayment options or made a payment or something like that, it might update more frequently, but at least monthly, this data will update. And if it's been 12 months or more since you've come in here and looked at this, then it's time to do another physical exam, right? In this hyper changing landscape, every other month is probably a good idea to take a peek in here just to make sure you're not missing anything, right? Because they're constantly updating stuff as, the courts get involved, as we've turned repayment back on after the pandemic forbearance and saw that it wasn't going very well. And then we made some changes on top of that, and the loan servicers were getting confused. So they're trying to give them some more time to get their systems in order. There's tons of things that are changing in here. So you want to make sure that what you're being told by your loan servicer matches what you're seeing in your file. And you can only really do that well if you're working from the most recent data that you have available. So grabbing the newest file that you can, go upload it in this My Student Loans tool. Do that right now while we're sitting here, right? So you can see what you're seeing in your student aid data file, and then use this as an opportunity to ask questions about that during this session. So I see a question here. So are you referring to submitting this to VIN every other month or checking student aid? So you could do either, right? But submitting it to VIN every other month might be a little bit much unless you have a question every month, right? So, but when you say submit to VIN, I differentiate using the Student Debt Center yourself versus using the Student Debt Center and then going to the Student Debt Message Board area where you would post a question about maybe what you're seeing and getting kind of that full physical exam run through with Becca or I on the Student Debt Message Board area. Those are kind of different activities, right? So I would encourage you to grab a recent student aid data file and upload it into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool just as a sanity check, right? When I get an email from my loan servicer that says, hey, it looks like your anniversary date for your income driven plan is approaching, I want to check that against what my student aid data file says, because I know that there's been a bunch of changes in things like those income-driven recertification timeframes, particularly recently, right? This one also shows, like, for example, why this is not, I know this is currently not up to date, not only because it's a year old, but because REPAYE changed to save, right? So you should see in a newer version of this file that your repayment plan would actually show save instead of REPAYE, right? So those are things that you want to check, right? And with that change, that monthly payment probably changed too, right? So those are the things that I want to look for in that student aid data file, particularly on that on the doer data side of things. The income-driven repayment eligibility tab will show you which income-driven repayment options you have available, right? So here's a perfect example, right? So we look at these, and I call these income-driven repayment plan profiles, and we talk about profiles on the VIN Foundation .org blog, as well as the WikiDebt resource in the Student Debt Center. This will kind of help you to unpack. Let's say save goes down, right, by the courts, or because the Trump administration doesn't want to offer that anymore, and the court said, you can't really do that anyway, right? So what happens then? Well, in this case, this person is eligible for the original version of IBR. So I mentioned that when I was talking about my wife and my loans, right? So that was the plan that we started with, right? So you have that option to fall back to that older version of IBR. Now, if you're eligible for pay-as-you-earn or the newer version of IBR, that would be better, provided that pay-as-you-earn also survives, right? We'll see that too. But this is what we're going to kind of use going forward here in the short term, as we start to see the fallout of, the courts getting involved and the change in administration. What's going to be left for you to work with from an income-driven repayment standpoint? If you're working towards, and I can see here that this person has some public service loan forgiveness credit, right? So if you're working towards public service loan forgiveness, your progress is logged in that student aid data file, provided that you have submitted a public service loan forgiveness employment certification form at some point along the way, right? And this is a great way to see, does the time that my file shows actually match up with what I expect to be in there, right? If I know that, I've been working with a institution that's a nonprofit for the last 5 years, and I only see 36 months of credit in here, then it's probably time for me to submit another public service loan forgiveness employment certification form, or start asking questions about why I don't have as much time logged in here as I would have expected, right? So it serves as kind of that, trust but verify concept, right? I don't ever trust the loan servicers, right? Because they've been part of the core reason why student loans are such a mess. But this gives me a way to verify what it is that they're showing, or to identify areas that they're telling me something that's inaccurate, right? So this is a great way of just doing some accountability, sanity checking on what's going on with your student loans. All right, so I would encourage you definitely to upload that student aid data file in there. Start to get familiar with what's in there, and then here we'll cover, what do we know now, right? So SAVE, the most recent version of the income-driven repayment options, the one that previously was known as revised pay-as-you-earn, has been blocked by an appellate court since July of 2024. And as a result of that block, the Department of Education moved everyone who was using SAVE into a no interest, no payment forbearance. And they said a couple of weeks ago that that's going to last for at least another 6 months. Maybe it's going to be a little bit shorter, because this current administration is going to, usher themselves out by January, right? So we're going to have to keep an eye on that, right? So that's one of those areas that has been uniquely impacted by the result of yesterday's election. So we're going to have to watch, when does SAVE get discontinued, and when will the loan servicers expect us to either move or automatically put us into something else, right? And that, up until yesterday, that was going to be at least 6 months, but maybe it'll be shorter. So I'm not really sure yet. There's no forgiveness credit during this particular blockage, and since July. So that's complicated people who are working towards public service loan forgiveness or otherwise working towards income-driven repayment forgiveness. There is no income recertification required, right? So that's one of those things that, again, at least for the people that are in SAVE, and that's why it's so important to check that, right? Which repayment option am I in? Now, this person, I know that anybody who was using REPAYE was automatically transitioned into SAVE when SAVE became available in last October. And then when SAVE got blocked in July of 2024, anybody that was in SAVE was automatically put into that forbearance. So that's why I want to see, what does my file show? What does my repayment plan show me? And then the anniversary date, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you're in SAVE, right? Because you don't have to update your income because you've been moved into this forbearance period. So those are pieces of information that we can work with and then apply what we know now to make sense of it. Forgiveness under any of the other ICR plans. So income contingent repayment is what ICR stands for. ICR was the original version of making student loan payments based on your income and has been around since 1994. And the way that was set up is kind of wrapped up in the litigation that is happening with SAVE. So the lawyers are questioning, the ones that are bringing this case are questioning whether or not Congress authorized forgiveness in the way that ICR was first created. And pay-as-you-earn, revised pay-as-you-earn, and SAVE were all modifications of this original ICR plan. Right, so depending on how far this ruling goes against SAVE, we could see forgiveness stripped back for all of these versions of the income-driven repayment options. That would leave us with the income-based repayment, IBR versions specifically, where in the Higher Education Act, the law that governs student loans and student loan repayment specifically mentions student loan forgiveness and when it should be received, right? So the IBR plans are in a much stronger position legally than these are. So we do have to wait to see what happens. But again, one of the things on the wish list for the incoming Trump administration is to eliminate these forgiveness plans and replace them with some other version that reads a lot like IBR, but is probably not as beneficial as either of these IBR versions. But it's a little too soon to tell on that. We're gonna have to see more details and if and when they actually go through with that. The IDR applications that people have been submitting, right? So if you've been trying to switch plans or you're applying for income-driven repayment new, those applications have been paused. But the Department of Education has said recently that in, quote, the coming weeks, they're going to resume those and start processing them again. If you did apply for SAVE, those aren't going to get processed, right? But depending on when you submitted them, if it's been more than 60 days, then you are eligible to have your loans put into that same general forbearance where no payments are due, no interest is accruing, but you're not receiving forgiveness credit, right? So it's just a matter of how long that general forbearance period created by this SAVE court blockage is going to actually last. They may reopen pay-as-you-earn and ICR this fall. This is in an effort to get people across the public service loan forgiveness finish line. So in the public service loan forgiveness language, which is also law in the Higher Education Act, it does mention specifically any of the plans that were created by the Department of Education that are deemed eligible for public service loan forgiveness credit can still receive public service loan forgiveness, and that these plans would be eligible. Right. So to the extent that you're eligible for something like pay-as-you-earn, everybody with direct loans are eligible for ICR. Those are potential options to get across that public service loan forgiveness finish line. There are technical differences between processing and general forbearance. So just in case you call your loan servicer and they mention something about 60 days, that's a processing forbearance. So you're eligible for a 60-day processing forbearance from the time you submit an application, which means you don't have to make a payment. Interest will accrue during those processing forbearance periods, but you're also eligible for forgiveness credit during the processing forbearance. But after that 60-day period, they'll either put you into some plan or you have to request a general forbearance. And that's when the interest will stop, payments stop, but you also no longer receive forgiveness credit. I did see some people ask about the one-time payment count adjustment. So this was a benefit that was available for a little more than 2 years. It was a special period that finally closed this past June, where the Department of Education was offering forgiveness credit for any prior repayment time and even certain deferment and forbearance time. So you may have noticed some communication, at least from VIN or VIN Foundation, where we're encouraging people to consolidate their loans because that would give you that opportunity to maximize that payment count adjustment. The closer you get to that 20 or 25-year time frame under an income-driven plan, or if you could get all of your loans that might have had different public service loan forgiveness amounts of credit on the same clock, the sooner you would reach forgiveness, right? So this was a way to try to address all of the prior errors in the student loan repayment system and the confusion around, what is eligible for forgiveness, what's not. So it's kind of like a big reset button. Like, hey, we've recognized this has been messy, sloppy, poor accounting. We're going to give everybody a chance to get forgiveness credit. And the closer you would find yourself to this 20 or 25 years or 10 years in public service loan forgiveness, the closer you would be to receiving forgiveness. So it was supposed to be easily available through the federal student aid portal. That has not happened yet. Hopefully it will happen before this administration leaves this coming January. But in the meantime, there is a way for you to check, right? So it's a little bit of a hack, but you can look at your count adjustment. And we've been helping people on VIN recently pick through their forgiveness count data, and we're happy to do that if you need some help. But this is another thing I would hope you would check right now while you're sitting here. So the first thing is you need to log into studentaid.gov, right? And then you're going to open a new browser tab, right? So I should still be logged in. Oh, actually logged me out. So I'm going to log back in here. It's going to send me a code again. Super secure. So I'm logged back in. Scary language again. And I'm going to open a new tab, right? So open a new browser tab, right? And then we're going to go to this API link, right? It's kind of ugly. Here, I'll maybe, or actually, I can just paste it in the chat here. Oh, it looks like Rebecca already did that. Thank you. All right, so this is what it looks like, right? So if you go to that page, you can see all of this ugly data here, right? And it kind of listed by income-driven plans. Now, not everybody's eligible. You can see here, it tells me I'm eligible for IBR. I'm not eligible for the new version of IBR. I know that's true. Eligible for SAVE, right? But it's probably going to go down, right? I am not eligible for pay as you earn. That's true. I am eligible for public service loan forgiveness, but that's just because of my loan types, right? So I can use this information. I can see that I've logged so far under SAVE 143 qualifying payments, which is roughly 12 years, right? It's 1 month shy of 12 years, right? I need 300 monthly payments, which is 25 years, right? Which means I have 157 left, roughly 13 years to go, right? So that's what I expected, right? So this is a good way to check where you are in the forgiveness time frame, so you know how much progress do you have, how much do you have left to go. You might even see if you've got a lot of different loan types, you might even see different numbers for different loan types. I only have consolidation loans remaining, right? So when they were consolidated at the same time, so the two loan balances I have remaining have the same count. Right? So you can look at that forgiveness count data. If you're not sure what you're seeing, again, this would be a great reason to head over to the student debt message board area and post that. I think this actually, here's an example of what these look like. I'm pretty sure this person posted there. Yeah. So you can see here, this is somebody who we're working through their student loan questions with. They can post anonymously, right? Becca and I know who they are, but the rest of the community does not, right? And they just posted their payment count information so we can work through that and look at it with them, right? And then kind of, confirm for them what we're seeing. And any veterinarian has access to this, whether you're a VIN member or not. We do need you to have a VIN login, right? So if it's been a while, you can reactivate that login through VIN Foundation. If you're still working for an academic institution or you're doing, some advanced training, you can have access to VIN for free, which also gets you access to the student debt message board area as well. So how much longer until you reach forgiveness? Where are you in that time frame? And how do you get there? Right. That's going to be the big question we're going to work on next, helping people answer is, how are you going to continue to earn forgiveness credit when we know that save is likely to no longer be an option, and some of these other options may also go away. So if we no longer have those options available, should we switch to those older IBR options? Your income-driven repayment plans normally have anniversary dates or the date by which you have to provide updated income information so they can continue to calculate your payment based on that income. This has been a mess ever since the pandemic. So, I mean, they turned off all those anniversary dates during the pandemic. They tried to turn them back on. And then when we added save, that made it more difficult. And it's just been kind of a mess. So recently they pushed that out again. So anybody that has an anniversary date that is before February of 2025 can add 1 year to it. Right, so this is another reason why you want to check that student aid data file regularly to see if your anniversary date or your current income driven plan has changed, has been pushed beyond that February 2025 date. Right, so that's a excellent excuse, if you will, to go to studentaid.gov, download that student aid data file and upload it into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. I've got a newer one here. I'll show you an example. I think it has a more up-to-date anniversary date in it. The interwebs would cooperate here. There we go. All right. So this one. Check this one out. So this is another, again, this is a person that's using pay as you earn, which is great, right? So you could still get forgiveness credit, IDR and public service loan forgiveness for loans that are in pay as you earn. If you've crossed the forgiveness finish line, they won't offer you actual forgiveness until they get a little more clarity on that. But technically, you're still supposedly earning forgiveness credit by using a plan like pay as you earn. And we see the anniversary date here is September of 2025, right? So that's, nearly another year from now. So that's good to confirm that information that I have this very low payment under a existing income-driven repayment plan, and my anniversary date is pretty far in the future, relatively speaking. So that's a good confirmation exercise there. And here you can see, in comparison to the previous example that I used, this person is eligible for pay as you earn. That makes sense because they're using it, right? So you can see that the income driven repayment eligibility tab shows that how much of that balance is eligible for pay as you earn. They are not eligible for the new version of IBR, right? So if pay as you earn also went away as part of the SAVE ruling, then they would be left with this older version of IBR or any new version that the next administration might put out there. All right, so repayment options come in two flavors. Generally, I've talked a lot about the income-driven plans, mostly because they're the most confusing, but they're also the most beneficial. You can always choose to use a time-driven option, right? So a time-driven option is more like a traditional private loan, mortgage, auto loan, any other type of debt that you ever have operates on a time-driven repayment scale, right? Meaning you set the amount of time that you're agreed to pay that loan back, and then your principal and interest rate determine that payment required to extinguish that balance in that agreed amount of time, right? You could do that with your federal student loans. The problem we run into for a lot of veterinarians, particularly ones that have higher student loan balances, is that those monthly payments are really, really high, right? And depending on where you are in your career and how much you're earning, this may not leave you a lot of room to do anything else on the financial planning spectrum, right? So that's where the income-driven plans are so beneficial, right? So they're only available to federal student loans. Unfortunately, again, we've seen a lot of changes. For a while, it was fortunately, right? We kept adding and adding more beneficial plans, but then now we've entered a kind of a new world, right? So revised pay as you earn turned into SAVE, which was really beneficial for the short period of time that it lasted. It got blocked in July. As part of that, we eliminated pay as you earn and ICR, at least to new entrants, right? If you were using pay as you earn or ICR before they were phased out, you can continue using those, right? But now they're talking about bringing those back, right? Now, if they do come back, how long will they last? Those are things that remain to be seen, right? But we know we'll have these older versions of IBR to fall back on if needed. It's a little bit too soon to say that you should jump ship and jump into an IBR plan. If you're eligible for the newer version of IBR, it's a lot more favorable. So if you are really close or wanting to keep that forgiveness clock ticking, then that could be a viable option. With the results of yesterday's election, we're going to have to really think through that a little bit more. I mean, it could make more sense to move into those plans sooner rather than later. Personally, I'm probably, since I'm using SAVE, my wife's using SAVE, we're in that forbearance. I'm going to wait and see what happens when that officially ends, what that transition is likely to look like before I make that decision to switch back to IBR. But here's kind of the way that they work, the way that they calculate the payments. So they take a percentage of your discretionary income. And discretionary income is defined as your taxable income minus a certain percentage of the federal poverty guidelines. Right. So for IBR, pay as you earn, it was 150% of the federal poverty guidelines. For SAVE, it was 225% of the federal poverty guidelines. Right. So we're subtracting a bigger number. We had a lower payment using SAVE. From what I've seen of the proposed Trump administration changes to the income-driven plans, they want to offer something that's 10% of your discretionary income with no multiplying factor, right? So it would essentially be your taxable income minus the federal poverty guideline for your family size, right? So there would be no multiplier there, right? So it'd be 10% of a little bit smaller number, right? And then you would make payments for a period of time until you reach forgiveness or your balance is zero, right? So we'll see if that comes to fruition. That's kind of how ICR was set up, the original one, right? But again, ICR was used by almost nobody because it really wasn't that beneficial, right? It didn't result in a very beneficial monthly payment for anyone. Hence the reason why we kept adding and changing some of these plans. So the newer versions are more beneficial, but we're starting to lose some of the more beneficial ones. Here's just some math examples of what those payments would be at an income of $130,000, right? This is why SAVE was so beneficial, right? It was the lowest minimum monthly payment. And, if we have to revert back to things like the older version of IBR, those payments go up by quite a bit. This is a table I had to resurrect. I just did this morning. I resurrected the IBR 2009. This past summer when SAVE was created, I thought we were going to be done talking about IBR 2009, and now, what's old becomes new again. So we're going to have to, dig up that math and see if those are going to be viable options for people that are approaching forgiveness. So, but again, it really, you can see that there's some pretty significant differences between the old version of IBR and the new version of IBR, right? So that's why doing that student loan physical exam is so important to see which version are we talking about when we're talking about your student loans. All right, so forgiveness, generally speaking, you make payments for either 20 or 25 years, right? Depending on where you are in that repayment time frame, check that payment count adjustment. Once you reach that maximum repayment time frame, any balance that you have remaining will be forgiven and can be subject to federal income tax, depending on the IRS rules set up at the time. There is a tax exemption for any student loan forgiveness received between the 2021 and 2025 tax years. Again, I don't have a lot of confidence that this is going to survive. We'll see. Sometimes what happens is that Congress can't agree on anything, and then they just kind of do a blanket extension of what the previous law was. So if we get lucky, maybe that will carry over to the next 5 years. But I don't have a lot of confidence that we're going to see that particular tax exemption survive this next version of Congress. Depending on how you look at it, the tax bomb that everybody affectionately refers to it as, what you would have to pay in tax when you reach forgiveness is either a penalty. I look at it as a discount. Again, nobody pays 100% income tax in this country. So depending on what the tax rates are, right, and depending on how much is forgiven, right, you're going to pay cents on the dollar for what's remaining, right? So it's not just because you look like you have to pay a tax at the end doesn't mean it's something to avoid, right? It may be something that's going to work out in your favor and be more beneficial financially for you. For those of you that are working towards public service loan forgiveness, as long as you have all direct loans using an income-driven repayment plan, that's tough right now because there's really only one remaining option, the IBR, except for those of you that are already in something like pay-as-you-earn. Those are eligible public service loan forgiveness plans. And then the final requirement is that you're working at least 30 hours per week with some kind of eligible nonprofit. So 501c3 or a state, federal, tribal organization, local municipality that's a nonprofit, those types of things will be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. All of the academic institutions, the veterinary academic institutions are 501c3 nonprofits. So if you're working there, then that should be public service loan forgiveness eligible as long as you're doing these other things. So this was one that, again, submitted by one of you who registered. I'm working towards public service loan forgiveness. I have 12 payments left, right? So 9 out of the 10 years. With the SAVE program currently blocked, what is my best option moving forward? Right. So we know, again, if you're in SAVE, you're not earning any forgiveness credit. And because of the change in administrations here, it's not likely that you're going to receive any credit for that saved time beyond when the court blocked it. It's also not likely that SAVE will survive, right? So if you're really close, like this person is, and they have 12 payments left to go, right? This would be one that really should think about switching to income-based repayment, right? Or if ICR produced a lower payment, you could wait and see another month or so to see if the Department of Education re-releases those plans And if ICR would result in a lower monthly payment than you can get in IBR, then you might choose ICR, right? But you're going to be looking at IBR, ICR. If you're eligible for pay as you earn and it's re-released, maybe you can jump into there to get that last 12 months of public service loan forgiveness credit, right? But those are going to be your options for trying to satisfy that final month. I've got a question here, anonymous. I am teaching at an AVMA accredited university in the UK, so we have lots of US students. What is the current status on loan repayment for expats? So great question. So I saw somebody asked about that too. And thanks for bringing it up. So anybody who has US federal student loans are eligible for these income-driven repayment options, the ones that are available. Right. So once those students who are using US federal student loans graduate and enter repayment, they can get their loans into whatever suite of income-driven repayment options are remaining. Right? Whether they live and work in the US or they live and work outside of the US is not particularly relevant. They can still use the income-driven repayment options. Now, folks that continue to live and work outside of the US, oftentimes their income on a US tax return is quite low, if not zero, right? And given that the income-driven plans allow you to have your payment calculated from your income, if their income is zero on a tax return, their payments on their student loans will be zero. Now that sounds great, right? But they're also going to be racking up a whole bunch of interest, right? Because we're probably going to lose the one plan, Save, that provided a way to cover the interest while your payments were very low or zero. You're going to end up accruing a whole lot of interest. And we see this now for folks that have US student loans that live and work outside the US, right? They have a whole lot of what's called unpaid interest. And that will add to the balance that's ultimately forgiven that they'll likely have to pay tax on, right? So the longer you stay outside the US and you're not reporting any, positive income, the longer your payment will be zero, but you still will not escape that tax at the end, right? Especially if you have to pay a tax on what's forgiven. So you should still be planning and saving for it for that eventual tax on forgiveness. If you do have loan types that are other than direct loan types, like those health profession student loans, those older FEL program loans, that's where you'd want to use a consolidation loan. So a direct consolidation loan will turn those non-direct loans into a direct loan and make them eligible for the income-driven plans and public service loan forgiveness. Because we base these payments on our income, right? If we're married, how we file our taxes will play a role. Right, so if we file our taxes, if we're married and we file our taxes jointly, then they'll take both our income and our spouse's income to calculate that monthly payment. If we file our taxes separately, then we can exclude our spouse's income from that monthly payment, right? And you can maybe think through this in your brain, right? If you have the veterinary school size student debt balance in the household and your spouse doesn't have student debt, right? Maybe they're working and have an income as well. It probably will make sense for you to file your taxes separately so you can exclude your spouse's income from that monthly student payment calculation. But it is a cost benefit analysis that you'll have to do to see if you're saving enough in monthly student loan payments to justify the additional cost you're going to pay by filing your taxes separately. So that's one of the other really common scenarios that we work through with veterinarians on the student debt message board area is, hey, I just got married, or, my spouse is earning XYZ. We don't know how to file our taxes. What's going to be most beneficial from a student loan standpoint? And then we can talk about how that will impact your monthly student loan payments. If you are working towards public service loan forgiveness, make sure you're submitting that public service loan forgiveness employment certification form at least annually, right? That's what's going to track that progress. So you know how close or how far you are from receiving that 120 monthly payments. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, but again, it's one of the reasons why I don't recommend people pay extra or pay more towards their student loans than they have to, because you never know where your career may take you, right? So if you end up in a public service loan forgiveness pathway, it could make more sense for you to pay less towards your student loans so you ultimately can have more of it forgiven if you find that you're working in a nonprofit capacity later on down the road. Public service loan forgiveness is still happening. You are going to hear a lot of talk, particularly now that we're changing administrations, and the incoming administration, the Trump administration, particularly hostile towards public service loan forgiveness. It is still baked into the law, right? So it's not going to be something they can easily eliminate. So even in their wish list of, disbanding the Department of Education and getting rid of all the income-driven plans, they've mentioned that they would have to create a new loan type to do it. And that's going to require Congress. And they may get that through if they control all three branches of government, right? But that doesn't mean necessarily that anybody with current direct loans that have public service loan forgiveness covered in their contracts would not still be eligible for it. It would just mean that people that receive new loans might not be eligible for public service loan forgiveness down the road, right? So it's going to be really hard, particularly over the next few years, to pick through, what's hyperbole and what's reality, right? So ask a lot of questions, particularly when it comes to things like income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness, because, there was a lot of misinformation out there before, but it's only going to multiply now with, kind of the change in administration. And it's radical how far we're going to swing from one side of the pendulum to the other, just in the student loan repayment realm, right? So it's going to be difficult to really know, fact from fiction for a little while there. All right. So how do you choose a repayment strategy? Now carefully, right? I'll show you some guidelines that you can use. We do still have income-driven repayment options available. It's a little bit harder to execute on them right now, and certainly, the uncertainty around them is not helping. But they are still on the books, right? So we're going to keep acting as if they are, and we can keep using them as if they will result in their written purposes until which time we see that they won't, right? And I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I do know that some of them have, are definitely stronger than others, and depending on your circumstances, you may very well benefit from them. So don't write them off completely just yet. They do provide insurance, so reducing the risk to yourself and your family. Something should happen to you, your student loans go away with you. They're not going to be the responsibility of anyone else in your household. If you do experience a decrease in your income, you can have your monthly payment decreased. If a student income-driven repayment option results in the lowest monthly payment compared to any other time-driven option, I generally want to use that, right? Because then I have more money under my control, and I can choose to use that in whatever way is going to maximize my overall financial wellness, not just focus on my student loans. Ideally, I want to reduce my total repayment costs. If I can get that in addition to these two, great. And oftentimes I can. If not, these first two bullets are more important than this one, because even the income-driven plans, because of the way interest works on your federal student loans, the cost range is not hugely different, right? So, and it's because your federal student loans do not compound, right? Now, if your federal student loans compounded, so the interest gets added to the principal continually, that would be a different story, but they don't, right? So we have principal, we are charged interest on that principal, and if your payments don't cover the interest, that interest accrues in a separate unpaid interest bucket. But I don't get charged any interest on that interest unless it gets added to my principal. And there are ways that I can prevent that from happening. So it's another one of the benefits that come with your federal student loans. So if you do have a debt to income ratio that's less than 1, you're likely to pay that balance to 0 before you would reach forgiveness, probably before you reach public service loan forgiveness. right? So in those cases, you can use an income-driven option if you want. It's kind of optional. In the early years, it often helps, especially if you're just getting started in your specialty, right? So if you just finished your training or you're just coming out of a PhD, you know, your income made on your tax return may not show what your full annual specialty income looks like just yet. In those cases, the income-driven plans can kind of help create a bit of a payment on ramp for you, so that payment slowly increases as your income on your tax return starts to increase, as opposed to, you know, having to pay that just as you're getting started after your training. You can also choose to accelerate your payoff. You know, when your debt to income ratio is less than 1, your monthly student loan payment is generally not a huge percentage of your take home pay. So you're going to benefit from paying a little bit more and accelerating that payoff faster. If your debt to income ratio is greater than 2, which is not an uncommon scenario in veterinary medicine, even for specialists, those income-driven plans are generally going to be the most financially beneficial. This is what usually tips the scale towards probability of reaching forgiveness is highly likely, right? So if we're highly likely to reach forgiveness, then we want to pay the minimum, plan for that tax, and then reassess as our circumstances change. And we use the loan repayment simulator to help us do that, right? And that's where I can head over now. We can take one of our examples, right? So let's say that this person stays in pay as you earn, right? We can send this information over to the repayment simulator, right? And they graduated in 2019. Let's assume that they've been using pay as you earn since they've been in their training and beyond. We'll give them 5 years of forgiveness credit, right? That's another thing that you can check in that payment count adjustment, right? So if you check that payment count adjustment, plug in what you see as your years remaining or your qualified years in repayment so far, right? And then you can set that in the loan repayment simulator. Right? That's one of the probably the most common mistakes I see when people are running their simulations, is they don't account for the current forgiveness credit that they have. Right? And that will have a significant impact on the simulation outcome. Right? If you think about it, if we pretend like we're starting from scratch and we have another 20 years before we reach forgiveness, it's going to look like it's going to cost a lot more than if we only have 15 more years or 10 more years or 12 more years until we reach forgiveness, right? So make sure that you do update that years in repayment here. And then what's your income, right? What are you earning in your capacity? What does your recent tax return show, right? It's best if you can put your adjusted gross income in here rather than a gross income, right? Because chances are you're receiving some kind of benefits from your employer that you might be participating in that reduce your gross income down to your adjusted gross income on your tax return. And if you provide a tax return as your income documentation or an income-driven plan, they will take that adjusted gross income number right off that recent tax return. So if you're going to model your income, use what your adjusted gross income shows. Right. So that actually, if you think about that, that rewards those folks that are participating in something like a 401k or a 403b, where they're deferring some of their income into later years, right? You're contributing to that 401k on a pre-tax basis. That will have a bigger difference between your gross income and adjusted gross income on your tax return. There are other things that do that too. Health insurance premiums, if you're contributing to an HSA or an FSA, those types of things are all pre-tax contributions, right? So they decrease your gross income down to that adjusted gross income on your tax return, which has a beneficial effect, not only for your overall financial health, but for lowering your monthly student loan payment on a income-driven repayment plan. If you're married, this is where you can start testing, doing that cost benefit analysis I was mentioning on, what if I choose to file my taxes separately from my spouse, right? So first depends on if you're married, right? So yes or not yet, that's imminent. If you have any children or other dependents that live in your household, you can add them. They factor into the monthly payment calculation by by way of that poverty guideline number that is used in the discretionary income calculation. If you do have a dedicated forgiveness fund already started, like I showed you my wife and I have, you can enter that amount here. You can put what you're earning on an annual basis to help factor that in. And then in the simulation, we'll adjust the estimated amount you need to save for any forgiveness in the forgiveness planning module. All right, so here when we hit the run simulation button, I can blow this up a little bit. Right, we can start to compare our repayment options. We can start to see the differences in monthly student loan payments. Here's the pay-as-you-earn amount, right? Compared to, say, if you tried to pay the balance back faster, right? There's some pretty significant differences there, right? This would result in amount forgiven, right? Here's the estimated tax, right? The total projected remaining cost is still less than if we were to try to pay that balance to zero, provided that pay-as-you-earn still offers a pathway to forgiveness. Right now, if we have to fall back to an older version of IBR, we can see that the cost calculation changes. Right, then we have to really consider, does it make sense for me to keep doing that? Right, that'll be a big question that's going to come up depending on what we see happen with the remaining income-driven options. In regards to forgiveness planning, right? Let's say I do think my tax is going to be about $84,000, right? I can play with the anticipated tax rate in here. I can play with the growth rate of my forgiveness savings fund, but I have to set aside $342 per month if I'm earning at least 4% return on that for the next 15 years. And it'll cost me $61,000 to get to my $83,000 estimated tax, which decreases my total repayment cost by about $20,000. Right, so that's how we can use time to our advantage and that probability of reaching forgiveness to build a forgiveness savings plan and cover and be prepared for that if we have to pay that tax. So this is where the simulator comes in. Maybe not so much right now knowing the specific numbers, although it does give us some ranges to shoot for. It's more about depending on what I change these income numbers to and my marital status and my family size, if every time I hit that run sim button, I end up with an amount forgiven, right? Then the probability is higher that I'm going to reach forgiveness. I should plan for that potential tax, right? But if there are more scenarios than not where I'm not reaching forgiveness, then I'm not really going to run to start a dedicated forgiveness plan, right? I'm going to look more at what are my monthly payments, what does my budget look like? Can I maybe accelerate this payoff? Right. So those are going to be the things that I'm looking for in the loan repayment simulator now, not necessarily the exact dollar amounts, right? But I'm just getting a sense of what do my monthly payments look like? Am I likely to hit forgiveness? Under which plans, right? And what does that forgiveness look like for me if I am projected to hit forgiveness more often than not? So if it were my dog, if I'm in the save general forbearance, I'm going to stay put, at least for now, until I have a little bit better idea of what's coming next. I kind of want to see how far the court goes. The big difference here between changing administrations and not changing administrations is that if, let's say, the court ruling comes out and is, just strike wholesale eliminate save, right? Because they're changing administrations, the next administration is not likely to appeal that ruling, right? So they're just going to accept whatever that is. Now, it could be the opposite. It could be that the federal appellate court could come back and say, hey, actually, we see that this was created just fine, just like the prior versions were. People that were using save can go back to using save as written. Now, in that case, the incoming administration is probably going to appeal that to then the Supreme Court for them to take a look at, hey, what do you think? Is this, what do you guys think about this? Because we don't believe what the appellate court said, right? So those are kind of the two possible pathways with the save outcome, which is, again, why I'm going to stay put for now, right? I don't have a lot of confidence that save is going to survive, but it could in some fashion. And if that necessitates an appeal to the Supreme Court, then we'll probably be in that forbearance even longer. If I'm in pay as you earn, I'm going to continue making those payments. I'm going to check my recertification dates. Again, none of them should be earlier than February 2025. And then I'm also going to keep checking my forgiveness progress to make sure that I'm still receiving some kind of forgiveness credit, whether that's income-driven repayment forgiveness credit or public service loan forgiveness credit. Income-based repayment, we had advised against using either version of IBR for so long. And it could be that we're all coming home to IBR, depending on how the fallout happens with the other remaining income-driven repayment options. So stay tuned for that. Public service loan forgiveness, your goal is to find the repayment option that provides the lowest qualifying public service loan forgiveness payment, right? And that's a little bit difficult now. I mean, we're certainly happy to help talk you through your options and see the pros and cons there. Generally speaking, if you don't see yourself switching away from public service loan forgiveness anytime soon, then stay put for now, even if you're in SAVE, right? If you can afford that time. People that are in SAVE right now, their loans are not costing them anything, right? There's no interest accruing. There's no payments are due. You're not receiving forgiveness credit. You're just kind of kicking that can down the road a little bit, right? From a time value of money standpoint, it's actually saving you money, right? Because you're going to pay that balance off later with dollars that are worth less than they are today, right? So it's not a big deal to run to something right now. Now, if you have a clock ticking on your qualifying public service loan forgiveness employment, or you're one of those people who's chomping at the bit to change from, nonprofit to for-profit practice as soon as you can get public service loan forgiveness, that's a different story, right? So then you may need to hop into a different qualifying income-driven plan sooner rather than later, so you can reach public service loan forgiveness sooner rather than later. So your circumstances are going to really matter there. Check that income-driven repayment eligibility as part of your student loan physical exam, and then check your payment count adjustment to know how far away you are from reaching forgiveness. Many of you indicated that you were in a PhD program or some other kind of training status. Make sure that you're keeping your loans in some kind of income-driven repayment option. This is going to get a little bit more complicated. It was wonderful while we had SAVE, because you could have a $0 payment or a very, very low payment, and the Department of Education would cover your interest while you're doing that advanced education. That's likely not going to continue. Now, if there was a person who was asking, I think I have that question here somewhere. Oh yeah, so if you're in a PhD currently, right, what plan are you in right now? Okay, so they're in SAVE. That means they're in the general forbearance, right? Not having a payment due and not having any interest accrue is very beneficial, right? Depending on where you are in that PhD, right? Those PhDs can be a couple of years to 7 or 8 years, right? If you're staring at a number of years left, the longer you can not accrue any interest on that, the less you'll have to manage later. Right? Now, the only exception to that would be if you're also able to earn some public service loan forgiveness credit during your PhD. That can be a little bit difficult depending on how that PhD is funded, right? But if you can get some public service loan forgiveness credit, then you may want to switch out of SAVE into a public service loan forgiveness eligible plan, right? So I would need a little bit more information. This would be a great opportunity. Maybe submit what we call a student debt and income signalment form, and then we'll post a summary of those responses anonymously for you to the message boards. We'll go through a student loan physical exam with you and answer questions just like this, depending on where you are in that PhD timeline and ultimately your goals. But try to keep your loans out of deferment, right? And again, any of these longer education tracks where you're also potentially enrolled in school taking classes, right? Whether you're paying for them or not, right? Oftentimes your loans can get automatically put into an in-school deferment, depending on how many courses you're taking, right? You want to really make sure that your loans don't end up in a deferment, because when they come out of that deferment, they will add that unpaid interest to your principal, called capitalization, right? So the higher your principal balance, the more interest is going to accrue, the more you're going to pay back, right? So there's some pitfalls during these advanced education tracks, particularly these PhDs, where you want to be aware of things like that in-school deferment if you're taking classes as part of extra that extra training and education. Well, I think we covered the consolidation piece. Let's jump over to the financial wellness. Right. So make sure you have a budget, right? No matter where you are in your career, it's always easier to manage things. You can't manage what you don't measure, right? So if you have a budget, you're measuring your financial ins and outs, you're going to do better than not. And unfortunately, over the years when we poll veterinarians as part of that student debt and income signalment form, usually those that are budgeting are fewer than those who are not, right? So the no's have it in this case. These others are all variations on no, right? They're usually creative answers. They're really fun to read. I loosely have a budget, or I check from time to time, these sorts of things, but that's really not budgeting, right? So generally speaking, it's about 50 plus and change to something in the 40s in terms of budgeting. Can't manage what you don't measure, so make sure that you're measuring your financial ins and outs. And then you have to establish some things that are kind of core to your financial wellness, right? Make sure you have an emergency fund that is equal to at least 3 months of your expenses. And the only way that you can know what 3 months of your expenses are is to build a budget, right? So once you have that budget, multiply your average monthly expenses by 3, set that as your emergency fund. Once you get to 3, see if you can get to 6. Once you're at 6, it kind of depends on what you're doing and what else is going on right around you. So, when you get to home ownership, or if you've got a business, or you're dabbling in a bunch of different things, then you may want to have a emergency fund that's a little bit beyond 6 months. Building your retirement savings, target at least 10 to 15% of your gross income, ideally into some kind of tax advantaged long-term savings. So like a 401k or 403b type account. If your employer offers a matching incentive, then make sure that you're at least contributing the maximum required to receive the maximum match. Because those matching funds are literally free money. And so if you're leaving any of that on the table for any reason, you want to change that strategy, right? And make sure you're taking advantage of that. Paying off less flexible debt, credit card debt, private loans, other debt, probably have a lower number than your student loan balance, but these are more risky than your federal student loans, even with all of the federal student loan repayment uncertainty, right? So we'll be able to adjust to whatever changes come next with the federal student loans. But if you are, kind of saddled with credit card debt, it can be tough to get out of that, right? So address things like that first. Try to use the income-driven plans for your monthly student loan payment to get it as low as you possibly can. Or even better yet, take advantage of this period of the save forbearance where no payments are due, no interest is accruing, to eliminate less flexible debt. Right? Overall, you'll be better for that. Saving for a down payment on a home, or to start or buy into a practice, those are also good funds to have available. The sooner you get those started, the sooner you can realize those particular goals. Don't let your student loans stop you from expanding a family. But if you are going to use the income-driven plans, make sure you're running some simulation to see if you're going to reach forgiveness, right? And if it looks more likely than not, then start a dedicated forgiveness planning fund, right? The sooner you start those forgiveness funds, the easier it is to pivot and adapt, right? And the more you'll save on that tax at the end, provided that you have to pay it. Right? And if you end up not having to pay a tax, or you pay your balance to zero because you find yourself in a position that's more lucrative than you anticipated, congratulations. Right? You've got a dedicated fund there to use towards something else that is no longer having to go towards your student loans. So it's a fairly good strategic way to approach your finances in general. This was an excellent question that came in through the registration. So I wasn't entirely sure if they were asking as the company, like that you want to help pay student debt and how to navigate in the max payable, or if you're an employee that is eligible to receive one of these student loan repayment benefits. But we can kind of talk about both. But there is no maximum that they they can pay or that you could offer to pay towards student loans. We've seen anywhere from people offering to pay $150 a month to tens of thousands of dollars, if not six figures, to eliminate the student loan entirely. Right? You can do any or all of those. There is a tax benefit for the first 5,250 that an employer pays to an associate's student debt balance, provided that they have the plan set up appropriately. Right, so there can be a tax benefit to it, but only up to the first 5,250 per year. That's another thing that we may see extended or expanded even under this new administration. We'll have to wait because that's due to expire in 2025 as well. So we'll have to wait to see what that looks like. But if you were to contribute more than that 5,250, or if you were to receive more than that 5,250 as somebody with student loans, anything above that would be considered as taxable income to you. Right. So that's, it's just like if they paid you extra. Right. So I'm generally not a huge fan of these employer perks to pay towards student loan balances. I would rather have the discretion to use my income as best as I see fit. And if it's, if my employer says, well, the only place you can use this extra benefit is your student debt, well, that's not very flexible. And it may not make much sense for me. Right. It could be that my employer is paying $1,000 a month towards my student loans, but that $1,000 a month isn't really going to help eliminate my student loans. Thus, it would be better if they paid that $1,000 a month directly to me so I can decide how best to use that. Maybe some of that goes to a forgiveness fund. Maybe some of that goes to my retirement planning or whatever. But I don't like to be locked in to having funds automatically put towards something that it may not really help me that much, particularly if I have to pay tax on that too. Right. So in the $1,000 a month example, right, if my employer is contributing $12,000 a year towards my student loans, and at best case scenario, 5,250 of that is non-taxable, that means I'm paying tax on that $7,000 extra amount. Right. I kind of want to have control or some say over where that goes if I'm going to end up paying tax on it. Right. So just because you can, or you may even receive a tax benefit for it, doesn't necessarily make it a good idea. Right? So you have to do some number crunching on that. For some people, it works. For others, it doesn't. Those benefits tend to favor those who have lower student debt to income ratios, right? Because they're the ones that are most likely to pay the balance to zero before reaching forgiveness. Anything that you pay above and beyond that's just going to accelerate that. Right. But if you're going to still hit forgiveness, even with those additional employer payments, it's not going to make financial sense, even if it's somebody else's money. Right. So in that case, I'd rather have access to that and decide what else to do with that money. Don't let your student loans control your life. There are ways to, set a reasonable payment, move about, building a robust financial plan that involves something other than your student loans, right? So explore those opportunities, ask questions, post to the student debt message board area. Student loan repayment will end, right? It's gotten uglier. There's no doubt about that. But one way or another, it's going to stop, right? So you'll either hit forgiveness or you'll earn enough to pay the balance to zero. Whether you reach forgiveness or you reach a zero balance before forgiveness, either is fine. Right? If you anticipate reaching forgiveness, plan for the tax unless you're going to hit public service loan forgiveness, in which case there's no tax that you have to pay. Focus on your overall financial wellness, and flexibility is the key, right? The more access that you have to more of your income, the better things you can do with it, right? So don't pigeonhole yourself into, you know, having to pay a majority of your income towards your student loans. Here is the link to I mentioned the student debt and income signalment form. You'll find a link to that on the student help page, the student loan help page here we have on VIN Foundation. That's where we will post those signalment forms to the student debt message board area. Again, I'll kind of show you what that looks like here. Oop, make me log back in. All right, so I'll come back to this one we were looking at earlier, but it's got kind of 12 back and forths here. This is what the signalment form looks like. So we've got a different application where we actually collect the answers to these questions, but then we process them, anonymize it, and send it over to the student debt message board area here. And this kind of puts you in the queue to receive that personalized assistance. So either Rebecca or I will go in here, pick through the data, the answers to your questions, use your federal student aid data file that you attach to this signalment form submission. We'll look at it in the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center, review it with you, right? And then based on your answers to these questions, based on the questions that you ask, we'll provide answers based on what we find in your student aid data file, and answers to questions like this, right? If you've got credit card balances, right? $10,000 credit card balance. This is high priority, no matter how much student debt you have remaining, right? Got to eliminate that kind of stuff, right? Depending on this auto loan, right? That could be more risky than your remaining student loan balance, even though the remaining student loan balance is a bigger number, right? Depending on what that car loan interest rate is, and cars tend to be depreciating assets, which means you can end up underwater on them easily, meaning you owe more than the car is actually worth. You can see you can get yourself into a position where if something should happen to that vehicle, you may owe money on it, even though you can no longer use it, right? So these are things that take priority over student debt every day of the week and twice on Sunday, right? But it's often hard for veterinarians to see past that very big number and all of the confusion around student loans. They're just like, well, I need to throw money at my student loans. I need to throw money at my student loans. And that's really not where that's really not where that should go in cases like this, right? Instead, if we know you're using Save, we know your payments are shut off, right? You've got a unique opportunity to gain some ground on things like this. So that's where we can help offer some of that assistance. If you'd like to receive it, and then it gives you a place, it's almost like a medical record, a place that you can continue to return to. You can review those analyses. You can post additional questions as they come up, right? And just keep building from there, right? So, and that's where all of this information that we're presenting to you today comes from, is from providing those consultations to our colleagues. And we have done so many of these now. It's hard to find a scenario that we haven't encountered, right? But of course, they're evolving every day too, as the system around us changes as well. So keep asking questions, and we'll do our best to keep finding the answers to those, so you can make the best decisions possible for your student loan repayment strategies. Any other questions while we wind it down here? Anything that I didn't cover that you were hoping that I would cover? Anything on the uncertainty front that I can half answer? All right. Well, not seeing anything else in the chat panel or in the Q&A panel. Thanks to those that were able to join, and you'll get an email from us to finalize your CE credit and some links if you want to review anything, including the recording of this session. And we look forward to helping in any way we can going forward.
Thank you, Tony. Really, I mean, that was, like you said, a lot of uncertainty right now about how things are going to play out, but I really think you did a great job of kind of walking us through where we stand and where things might go. So really appreciate that. And thank you also to ACVIM for helping to promote this and the whole series that we're doing. That email in the next couple of days with the recording, the CE link and everything will be coming from studentdebt@vinfoundation.org. So keep an eye out for that.
Sounds good. Thank you, Becca, and thanks again, everyone. And yeah, stay tuned, and we'll do our best to keep you informed.